Right now on a special live edition of Law&Crime's Daily Debrief, opening statements in the trial of movie producer Harvey Weinstein.
This is the reckoning.
Cameras are banned inside court, but our people are there with a complete wrap-up of the charges and the defense. Also, R. Kelly, a no-show at one of his court appearances. Plus, the trial of a Florida man accused of killing his mother and brothers. And
what you witnessed throughout this trial was fabricated.
Tears and claims of innocence from a convicted killer of a California family of 4.
That's why he's doing this, is these cameras.
Prosecutors fire back at sentencing. The Daily Debrief brings you the day in court. It's Wednesday, January 22nd.
Welcome to a special live edition of the Daily Debrief, everybody. We're broadcasting tonight from the steps of the New York Supreme Courthouse, where earlier today, prosecutors and defense attorneys presented opening statements in perhaps the most critical trial to date of the Me Too movement, the sex crimes trial of Harvey Weinstein. Law&Crime's Jesse Weber was inside that courtroom where cameras are not allowed. He'll be joining us in just a moment. But first, let's introduce the rest of our guests. Ohio Judge William Dawson is with us tonight, along with attorneys Jessica Ramirez and Mike Korobanix in our New York studio. Law&Crime host Stacey Delicat is also with us. We'll begin tonight with a look at the charges in this case.
Despite accusations against Harvey Weinstein from more than 80 women, prosecutors are seeking convictions on 5 counts from just 2 accusers. Mimi Haley is expected to testify that she agreed to meet Weinstein in his New York apartment in 2006 after rebuffing his previous advances. She has said she wanted to maintain her business relationship with Weinstein, but that he forced oral sex upon her. Her account resulted in count 1 of the indictment, predatory sexual assault, and count 2, committing a criminal sexual act in the first degree. The punishments are a possible life sentence and a possible 25-year sentence. The second accuser, Jessica Mann, was not named before trial. Counts 3, 4, and 5 are from her account. One of the charges alleges she could not consent. The punishments are another possible life sentence, a possible 25-year sentence, and a possible 4-year sentence. 4 other accusers, including actress Annabella Sciorra, are expected to testify as to other bad acts similar to the crimes charged.
Law&Crime's Jesse Weber was inside that courtroom for us here in Lower Manhattan. Jesse, tell us what the state said during openings.
Yeah, it was a pretty incredible opening. They painted a picture of a predator who sexually assaulted women over the course of 2 decades, using everything from power and influence to ultimately physical force. They said that you might have different times, different people, different places, but the same crime. And they went through the list. They started with Annabella Sciorra, talking about how Harvey Weinstein allegedly raped her in the 90s. Then they moved on to Miriam Haley, who was that production assistant that Harvey Weinstein allegedly performed forcible oral sex upon. Then we learned the identity of the second complaining witness, Jessica Mann, who Harvey Weinstein allegedly sexually assaulted on multiple occasions. The prosecution then moved into those 3 Molyneux witnesses. We learned their names, Dawn Dunning, Tara Lee Wolfe, and Lauren Young. And it was everything from Harvey Weinstein allegedly masturbating in front of them to ultimately sexually assaulting them. Now, the big part about what the prosecution did whenever they talked about any account or any witness is why did they not report, or why did they stay in contact with Harvey Weinstein? They took the offensive and said this is why their behavior might look a little different from what you would come to expect from somebody who was sexually assaulted by Harvey Weinstein. They took the initiative, which is what the defense tried to jump on next.
And that's where we're going next with this. What did the defense do? We've all been waiting for the Harvey Weinstein defense. Today we heard it.
We heard it from Damon Sharonis, who's one of the attorneys representing Harvey Weinstein, and I got to tell you, it was a powerful opening statement. And he said it's a great narrative what the prosecution said. It's just not true. It doesn't hold water. And he went through each of the witnesses, and it was everything from why did their stories keep on changing from what they initially said or what they initially reported to make it look worse for Harvey Weinstein. And in particular with Jessica Mann, why did she maintain this continual relationship with him? He brought out a lot of the email exchanges and communications where it seemed that she was the one who kept trying to get in contact with him, and that they were having a relationship of some sorts, even at one point saying, I don't want to be referred to as a booty call. And he said the way that you're characterizing Harvey Weinstein in 2020 is not the same person that was being characterized back then.
Those emails will be certainly critical to the case as we move into witnesses. My colleague Angelica Spanos was outside this courthouse when celebrity attorney Gloria Allred spoke to reporters in her representation of several of Weinstein's accusers.
Well, Aaron, Gloria Allred started her morning off by walking up the front steps of the courthouse. She turned to the media and said, "This is the reckoning." Now, one thing outside the courtroom we didn't see today were any protesters, and that is very different from the scene we saw in the beginning when this trial started. Allred is representing one of the two women accusing Harvey Weinstein in his trial here in New York, Mimi Halle. During the lunch break, Gloria Allred answered questions and attacked back at the defense's theory about emails between the victims and Weinstein after the alleged assaults.
Why the myth that women who were assaulted or raped or sexually abused and still have contact with the predator after their assault is just that. It's just a myth, and that continued communication doesn't mean that retroactively that sexual assault or rape or forced oral copulation did not happen.
We're expecting the witness testimony in this trial to be key here for both the defense and the prosecution, and we will be watching that very closely. I'm Angelica Spanos reporting in downtown Manhattan. Back over to you.
Let's jump in with some analysis at this point from our guests in our New York studios, Mike Korobanix, Jessica Ramirez, along with Stacey Delicat. So, Jessica, let me start with you. When you're listening to the tactics in this trial, do you think the tactics are good? Do you think the state did a good job? What do you make of it?
I think the state did an excellent job. It's a very difficult case. There's lots going on. I'm going to be very looking forward to the defense and what they say, and any experts explaining why victims do go back and why they contact their predators. And I've worked with victims a lot, and I myself have those questions, and it's explained. So I'm going to be very curious to see what happens. But I thought that the prosecutor did a great job.
Mike Korobanix, you're a former prosecutor, now a defense attorney. Do you think it was wise for the prosecution to take the offensive and just say, hey, look, these emails that the defense will try to characterize as a consensual relationship don't show that at all?
I think it was a very wise move by the prosecution. I don't think you want this jury seeing any of your witnesses get surprised by anything that the defense brings out. Prosecution gets the first bite at the apple by addressing the jury first, and it's very important they maintain a level of credibility with that jury, and the only way you can maintain credibility is to show what's in your favor, what's not in your favor, and if it's not in your favor, explain to them before it comes out why it's really not accurate.
Certainly, Stacey Delicat, we're watching this occur here in Lower Manhattan without the protests we saw back when the jury was selected. This is really the critical point, though. So many people watching this case, you've been there in the anchor chair all afternoon. Anything ringing in your ears as to the importance of this day versus the statements we heard out here, because they were very powerful?
I mean, look, we know that today is really what counts, not that the jury selection wasn't important, but here's when the case is actually getting underway. I mean, as for why there were no protesters, I don't know. People, this was built up in the media so much that January 6th was day one, that I think that was the day that everyone said, okay, let's go get our airtime, our FaceTime on TV. I wouldn't be surprised if throughout the trial we see people coming or going. Now the word is out that Annabelle Shora is going to perhaps testify tomorrow. Maybe some supporters will be out there. But I do think certainly today is when the real meat and potatoes, right, of this case starts to come out, and it's obviously going to continue over the next month or longer. I mean, the testimony, the witnesses, the cross-examination, this is what the case is all about.
Exactly, and there are two courts, of course, the court of public opinion out here on the streets and the court of law back there in that courthouse behind me. We'll be back with the rest of the discussion at the end of the broadcast. The defense in this case, of course, asked the judge at the trial court level here in Lower Manhattan for a change of venue. The trial judge said absolutely not, so the defense appealed that ruling to the next highest appeals court here in New York State. The defense cited publicity from networks such as the Law&Crime network, but the appellate division here in New York said in a one-page ruling, upon reading and filing the papers and due deliberation, it is ordered that the motion is denied in its entirety. Thus, the trial continued today with the jury seated here in New York. Judge William Dawson is a guest who joins us from time to time here on the Law&Crime Network. He's watching from Ohio. So, Judge, the defense in this harshly worded argument said the press pressure is just too great for a fair trial here. Many of the jurors know Harvey Weinstein. They know who he is. They know people who work in the press here in New York. And do you agree or disagree that this trial should have been moved somewhere else in New York State?
I disagree. Just like the Court of Appeals, I like how they only gave that pretty much one sentence ruling, but I totally agree with them. You know, this is a high profile case. It doesn't matter where you move it. The damage has been done in the sense that everyone knows about it. Everyone has heard about the Me Too movement. There is no way that you're going to get a juror that has not heard anything about the case, especially in a big city. So I agree, the case had to go on, but I don't disagree with the defense attempt. Actually, they had to try that, just like they're objecting to all the things in the opening statement, all the pictures. They're going to try every tactic, but the Court of Appeals was right on when they said the court was proper for this case.
So much for the Court of Appeals to look at, assuming that this case results in a conviction and then goes up to an appeal, because we have members of the jury panel who, for instance, apparently wrote books about cases that were shockingly similar to this. Another celebrity who appeared in this courthouse in Lower Manhattan today was Cuba Gooding Jr., the actor. At a hearing this morning, he learned that he will go to trial April 21st on allegations he groped 3 women at New York bars. He faces 2 misdemeanor charges of forcible touching and 1 sexual abuse charge. The judge ruled this morning that 2 other women who accused the actor of misconduct will also be allowed to testify as to other bad acts. Cuba Gooding Jr. has denied all allegations and pleaded not guilty to the charges. Also today, R&B singer R. Kelly's Illinois case is moving forward. The artist himself was not in court this morning. His attorney, Steve Greenberg, told the judge R. Kelly couldn't attend because of a recent medical procedure. R. Kelly is charged with several counts of sexual abuse against underage girls. Another hearing in that case is scheduled April 16th. We'll be back live here to Lower Manhattan for more on the Harvey Weinstein trial in just a moment. But first, here on the debrief, the trial of a Florida man accused of killing his mother and his 2 brothers. Plus, we're going to be talking about the McStay family murders in California. Joseph McStay and his entire family disappearing and turning up dead in the California desert. Sentencing now for the man who claimed until the end he didn't do it. That's when we come back. Welcome back to this special live edition of the Daily Debrief, coming to you from outside the Lower Manhattan courthouse where Harvey Weinstein is being tried. We, of course, are also following several local trials for you tonight, including reaction to the official death sentence handed down in California against defendant Chase Merritt. A jury there recommended that sentence last year in the killings of Summer McStay and her 2 boys. She was the wife of Merritt's business partner, Joseph McStay, for whom the jury decided Merritt should spend life in prison. The judge affirmed the jury's death recommendation and refused to listen to defense pleas that Merritt was innocent. Remember, there was unknown DNA in the graves of the 4 McStays, which the judge claimed was too degraded to test. The defense said otherwise. During the sentencing hearing, the victim's brother, Mike McStay, read from the Bible and read a song his murdered brother gave to him years ago. And then this.
This world was robbed of 4 beautiful souls. This whole thing is a bad deal. I'm not a gambler, but it's a pretty poor exchange rate. We lose 4 beautiful souls for one to remain. One that's heartless, a man that is the face of evil. He's unrepentant, he lacks a conscience, he's conscience deprived. He's non-apologetic, and he's merciless. He was a lifelong criminal.
Convicted killer Chase Merritt spoke at this sentencing hearing. He said through tears that he was sorry for the losses and that he loved the victims but did not kill them.
I am so very sorry. And Joseph's, Summers, and Joseph Jr.'s family, no mother or dad should have to bear this. The pain of losing their son or daughter. I did not do this thing. I know you do not believe this. And that kills me. But I believe that if you were to look deep into what has happened here in this courtroom, and over the last 5 years, you'd have to recognize that something's amiss. Something is wrong. What you witnessed throughout this trial was fabricated.
After court, prosecutors explained why they believe the unknown DNA from the victims' graves was presented by the defense, that it was not good enough as presented by the defense to run through an FBI database, and laid out why they stand behind their case.
It was very complex. It was also very circumstantial. Regardless of what was said in court today or was said here in front of the media, the record speaks for itself. The evidence speaks for itself. The jury's verdict speaks for itself. No interpretation by myself or by the defense is going to change that. In order to believe a lot of the things that were said in court today, you would have to ignore all of the DNA evidence, all of the financial evidence, all of the cell phone evidence that pointed towards the defendant's guilt.
In order for a government lab to run items into CODIS, there's a protocol that has to be followed. There has to be a memorandum of understanding between the private lab and the government lab. There has to be a site audit and visit, and then that can be run into CODIS. For anyone to say that we didn't try to do that or we didn't inquire as to whether that could be done is straight up false. He's doing this for this. That's why he's doing this, is these cameras. To make it seem like the district attorney's hiding biological evidence. That is not true.
The defendant had actually been taking money from the business and writing checks to himself and deleting those checks, calling into QuickBooks and canceling the subscription for QuickBooks after the fact, as well as an email that was discovered within the computer of the McStay family home detailing that the defendant owed Joseph McStay somewhere in the neighborhood of $42,000.
And now to testimony in the Florida case of a man accused of killing his mother and his brothers. Prosecutors in Pensacola are seeking the death penalty against Donald Hartung. At one point, authorities plan to suggest the killings were ritualistic and somehow related to the Wicca religion, a rare blue moon, or perhaps even Native American rituals. The state dropped that theory during openings and appears to now be claiming this was a case involving financial motives. Investigators described a bloody crime scene as the victims were stabbed, beaten, and shot. And as they worked their way through the house where the killings occurred, a key piece of evidence surprisingly fell into place.
Somebody had found a knife that fell out of the chair that was in the living room when they were trying to move it.
Were you called back out to the Deerfield residence?
Yes, ma'am.
And on what date was that?
August the 11th.
Okay, and why were you called out the next day on August 11th?
A knife had fell out of the couch that John was sitting on.
And each time that you went out to the Deerfield residence on August 10th and August 11th, did you take photographs of these knives?
Yes, ma'am, I did. The chair, after it was moved out of the front of the house, a picture of the chair with the knife that was found in it. It's a picture of the knife that was collected out of the chair. It was a picture of the knife that was found in the love seat, and the handle with suspected blood on it.
Did you see similar knives in the kitchen area of that home?
Yes, ma'am. There were several knife blocks.
And did you collect each of those knives from August 10th and August 11th?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Did you process both of those knives for fingerprints?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And what was your finding?
They were negative.
That crime scene technician was actually fired last year for stealing drugs from the sheriff's office evidence room. The defense took issue with her credibility on cross-examination.
We're stealing those drugs because you had developed an opiate habit, a drug habit, is that correct?
An addiction, yes, ma'am.
While your habit persisted, you continued to work on your job as a crime scene technician, is that correct?
Correct.
When you went out there to the scene, talking about the scene in this case, said at that time you were taking Lortab, is that right? And your response was, I don't know. I don't think so. Isn't that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you were definitely taking tramadol when you processed this scene, correct?
I think so.
And you were taking more than the prescribed amount?
No, ma'am.
So with the 24 felony counts you were charged with, You were facing potentially 170 years in prison, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
You were allowed to enter a no contest plea rather than a guilty plea.
Yes, ma'am.
An adjudication was withheld, meaning that you are not, as you sit here, a convicted felon, correct?
Correct.
And of course, we're back here now talking about the Harvey Weinstein case happening in the courtroom behind my colleague Jesse Weber and I. Jesse, we did hear from some witnesses today in the Weinstein case.
Yeah, we heard from our first witness from the state, a man named Lance Mayrov. He was actually a former board member of the Weinstein Company. He would eventually be one of the lead directors. And he was initially brought out to talk about the inner workings of the Weinstein Company and talk about the power and influence of Harvey Weinstein, both in the entertainment industry and also his connections with highbrow politicians and people in the media, trying to show the prosecution how much influence this man had, particularly over these young women. But where the conversation steered and where the defense ultimately took issue with was how he ultimately described Weinstein as an imposing figure, as somebody who was very litigious. He could be a charmer, but he could be loud and very vocal. During cross-examination, the defense said, "You don't like Mr. Weinstein, do you?" And he said, "Not particularly." And he admitted that fact. It would become later the defense had an issue with it, tried to get a mistrial because they felt the jury didn't have a right to hear from this witness about this information. But that was where the state started in their case, trying to give an overall picture about who Harvey Weinstein was.
Interesting tactic, because many of us were thinking we might hear from an expert to try to deflate the defense attack on the emails.
Right. Dr. Barbara Ziv is a name that we should all remember, and she was brought up during the course of the opening statements. She will be called as an expert by the state, a forensic psychiatrist, to talk about maybe everybody has a misconception, these rape myths about how people should behave when they are sexually assaulted, and these ideas of, well, you might stay in contact with them or not. The defense ultimately said, though, don't believe her because she never interviewed any of the witnesses and never read any of the reports.
It's going to be an interesting case as it moves forward. Jesse, I know you're going to stay in the courtroom for us to keep an eye on things as we move forward. We need to wrap things up, though, for this live edition of the Daily Debrief coming to you from Lower Manhattan, outside the Harvey Weinstein courthouse. It's been a great discussion with our panelists, but we need to sign off. We'll be back live from our studios in New York tomorrow at 5 o'clock Eastern for the Debrief live trial coverage. We'll pick up at 9.